Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. Today is Popcast 66, and it's called Nature's Wisdom, Part 16. So, yesterday we talked about restraint, and I have some more examples today in general about the various approaches to facing social arrangements problems together. Um, I want to note that social arrangement problems are very old problems. We know from looking at modern hunter gatherer societies, which gatherer societies, which still exist in a few places in the world and have been studied fairly carefully, that they all have a problem with two particular uh, aspects of social arrangement. And one is referred to as the big man problem, and the other is the slacker problem. So you have a group of 15 or 20 people, and by the by, sociologists and ethologists and people that study these things concede that it's possible that the social arrangements that we're seeing today have been influenced somewhat by modernity and circumstances of the lives of hunter-gatherer peoples being altered dramatically by the growth of um, other populations, and in particular by being forced out of the best landscapes for their lives, so that you can't make these things into the gold standard of how people lived anciently, but it's a pretty good insight. And so these groups are, range in size, but they can't get too large because then it becomes unmanageable. And they can't be too small because then they can't survive. You need enough people that some hunt, some gather, some are sick, some are old, some are very young, and collectively they're able to provide for themselves. And uh, so, a typical group size might be 19 or 20 people. Um, they're not going to have 40 or 50 people in a tribe, hunter gatherers. It's too big a group to arrange the social arrangements between. And bear in mind, they will live as bonded pairs in society. That's um, there are some extreme exceptions to that, but for the most part, no. And but the key thing is that when making social arrangements, um, there's these two problems that we still face in uh, easily recognizable form. Um, the big man is the guy who perhaps is really skilled as a hunter. And as such, he tends to be a bit full of himself. And it's actually not that much fun to live in the shadow of somebody who is a really important contributor to the health and welfare of the tribe, who's full of himself. And so they've developed a series of strategies over the years in dealing with these people. Um, and among the strategies are that it's socially considered rude for the big man to act like he's full of himself. And he gets reminded of that a number of times. Um, he might be given some recognition for his extraordinary contribution and his special skills. Um, but in general, he's expected to be the best hunter and be somewhat modest about it. And failing that, um, there'll be a lot of things like, for example, physically brushing past him and rudely bumping into him as an expression of discontent by other members of the tribe. Um, and essentially, it there'll be other public displays of displeasure. Uh, if it gets completely out of hand, he'll either be physically beaten or put out of the tribe, or he'll leave the tribe because he isn't desired to stay, and or he's so full of himself he figures he needs to be the leader of a tribe of people that will allow him to be the big man, obnoxiously so, and they'll put up with it. So he might get some other members of the tribe to leave with him. Bear in mind, in most circumstances, in the time period just 10 or 15,000 years ago, when the great majority of people lived as hunter-gatherers in small tribes, if you left on your own, you had a very good chance of dying. Survival depended on the support we get and give to each other. The gift of each other was kind of physically obvious. You just had too many things to take care of to do it on your own. And but for the tribe, the other side is also true. Should they put this guy out, or should he leave? Particularly if he leaves and take some other tribe members with him. Now the remaining members of the tribe may be too few, and perhaps there's no other hunter of great skill. So they're going to suffer increased risk of failing to be able to provide for themselves, as in you die. So there's a dance going on here. It's a delicate dance. Nobody wants to live in the shadow of somebody who's a really good hunter and who's also full of himself. It's just not any fun. And at the other hand, nobody wants to be too quick to put him out of the tribe or make life so miserable for him that he leaves the tribe, because they don't want to lose the benefit of his hunting skills. And if he leaves the tribe and takes a group, they don't want their own existence threatened by having too few people, none of whom are particularly as skillful as hunters. So, the same dance goes on with the slacker, and for the same reason. There's always some guy who just doesn't feel like carrying his share of the load. And it could be that he's a person who we speak of in psychological type terms as somebody who's only interested in responding when the situation is pretty grim. So, when they're being attacked by some other tribe, this guy might be the first to go running out in defense of the village against the attackers. Or when, some wild beast is attacking, or when some other, a fire, or some difficult moment is upon us. Sometimes these people who have done little rise up and do way more than anybody could reasonably expect. So the slacker can be a pretty complicated situation psychologically, but typically speaking, from the point of view of the tribe, everybody's got to pull his weight to the extent that he can. Tribes were essentially something in the neighborhood of socialist or communist or Christian in this societies, in the sense that they helped old people get the food that they weren't able to provide for themselves, and they helped young people get the food that they weren't able to provide for themselves. So they helped those in need. But a healthy slacker who just didn't feel like working, he was given very spare amounts of food and sustenance, and he was again publicly ridiculed. And public opinion matters a lot in a small tribe. Um, the 15, 20 people, it matters a lot if you're considered to be a stand-up guy, stand-up member of the tribe, or you're considered to be a slacker or an obnoxious big man. Um, so they used reputation and they used a lot of public pressure. Um, but basically, the last choice is, do we, put the slacker out because we've about had all we want from him. And you have the same risk. You keep putting people out of your tribe. Your tribe may become too small. In his case, the risk is a little less because he's not contributing much anyway. And he's very unlikely to get a group of followers to go with him to start a new tribe. Um, but after all, he's somebody. He's a member of a small tribe. So there's a close relation. It not a blood relation, but a close relation. Um, and so there's a good deal of reason to try and be generous, try to be supportive, try to be encouraging, try to use rough treatment, public disapproval, a variety of methods to get him to do something, to start pulling part of his weight anyway. And so, my point is, social arrangements are very difficult, and it's a very, very old problem. As far as we know, for as far back as we can tell, people have lived in tribes. And until essentially the beginning of agriculture, when they began to live in villages. And social arrangements got a lot harder. And it became possible for the big man to find a cult of personality that made him not just a leader, but some kind of a person with a special set of rights and entitlements, and the issue of wealth and wealth disparity began for the first time. There wasn't a whole lot of wealth disparity among the 19 or 20 members of a hunter-gatherer tribe. Um, One guy got nicer um, things of those few things that were available as a token of respect for his leadership qualities. But we didn't have the sort of incredible disparity that we began to see later, where wealth developed. As people became more skillful at manipulating the earth around them, they started tool making, became weapon making, and it became possible for uh, large groups to organize themselves in a warlike fashion. And now you start this whole chain of developments that yields the income inequality we have today. So these problems are very old. That one dates back, 15,000 years or so. The one about wealth inequality, but the big man and the slacker go back as far as we know. And people have been living in our ancestor species, or go back 2 million years, to where they're pretty similar to us in key social arrangements. And so nobody solved this problem yet, and it's never going to be solved. It's always going to be with us, both the big man and the slacker problem. They're not going to go away. They're part of human nature. There are people who will slack off if given the chance. And there are people who get full of themselves and lord it over others if given the chance. And the question is, what responses make sense in modern times to deal with these things? So I actually don't know anything about the cult of personality, people like the Kardashians and Paris Hilton, who, as I gather it, became famous by becoming famous. I'm not sure how. And I can understand in theory why. It's just totally unappealing to me to have my life and my personality is such on display. I would find extremely uncomfortable and unpleasant. Um, I'm recording these at an old age, but it was a big decision for me to decide to be this candid in in this format. And my comfort is nobody ever heard of me, and nobody's watching these. And in due time, if they ever gain an audience, it'll I'll be gone, and that's fine. I'm good with that. Um, I'm not a seeker after fame and glory, and I see too much the horrible, horrible consequences to people who do. And this has something to do with social arrangements because, this big man problem exists very much in modern times in the form of the cult of personality. Um, I'm I'm gonna not talk about that too much today, except to tell a story. Einstein was, of course, very very famous after his papers were finally seen as brilliant insights into the physical world. At first, they looked like nutcase theories, and it was only because he operated in the world of physics where things could be mathematically checked and predictions could be made, and then they could be compared to events, and the events supported his theories that he became, the revered international genius. We know of him as Einstein. So at a point in the 30s, because he was Jewish, he left. Um, uh, I honestly don't remember if at the time he was living in Germany or Austria, but regardless, he left uh, the range of Hitler and he moved to the United States and he accepted a position at Princeton where he spent, I believe, the rest of his life as a professor. And he was there a year or two, and you can't imagine how different the life was for professors in those days compared to now. Um, they were paid in the coin of respect, and they had, stature, but they didn't have the big salaries. It wasn't possible for them to live the big life. Um, they weren't selling millions of books. They weren't, TV personalities. They weren't appearing on Dr. Phil um, and having $1 million endorsement contracts. A professor lived in a small house and was a relatively modest individual. But a young professor was just accepted at Princeton, and his wife immediately came with her heart in her hands and knocked on the door of Einstein and asked for his autograph. She was so in awe of him. And he threw a hissy fit. And he screamed at her and said, "That's how Hitler arose, the cult of personality." And he slammed the door. And of course, one assumes that she left in tears because she certainly hadn't gone to pay insult or anger the great man. She'd gone to pay respect. And it is quite typical in modern times that we ask for autographs from people who are personalities. Um, this, relates somewhat to the current divide. Uh, I remember when Obama was running, as he got to the point where they were about ready to nominate him as president at the convention, um, he had to ask the crowd to stop chanting Obama, Obama, because he said it was essentially the cult of personality, and that it wasn't all about him. It was about ideals and ambitions of his campaign, which was to try and unite us all. And I'll just leave it that obviously at this moment in the Great Divide, the issue of a cult of personality and its its wisdom or its dangers is still very much with us. Um, and this is part of social arrangement problems. Do we arrange society in such a way that we encourage the cult of personality or that we discourage it? Is there a practical way to do either of those two things? It doesn't follow that just because you'd like things to be a certain way that you're able to make them be that way. Even if lots of people feel the same way, there may be aspects of human personality that just are unable to resist whatever it is that you're opposed to. And so it may be that the cult of personality is with us for the rest of time. I don't know. I got to tell you, that scares the hell out of me. Had I been cursed with a huge fame and wealth as a young man, I seriously doubt that I would have had enough good sense to listen to my wife and to grow and learn uh, how to have a better relation. I think it would have been quite tempting to uh, take up with one of the young things that comes and throws themselves around the arms of the rich and famous. And then my life is a disaster compared to where it is today, where I've had the pleasure of growing together with my wife and the two of us helping each other become better persons. And I wouldn't have passed that up for anything, not for fame, not for glory, not for money. I just think that fame, glory, and money get in the way of your benefiting from your family and friends. And so I only got to one story, Einstein and the Cult of Personality. I got a lot more stories, some of them deeply personal, which I'm a bit, nervous about revealing. And but there's tomorrow, and I'll find my courage overnight. Okay, take care. Bye bye.